The scripture will be on the screen for you in John chapter 21, verses 15 through 17. Jesus has already been crucified. That was, a couple weeks ago for us here, but it was a little bit ago also for this guy named Peter that we're going to talk about this morning. And he has now been resurrected and appeared 3 times. This is the 3rd time that he's appeared to his disciples. Here's what John's account of their conversation between Jesus and Peter is. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Well, then feed my lambs, the little ones," right? Go to Kids Point, help them out, feed them, please. And he goes on in verse 16 to say this. Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Probably sound a little confused at this point. And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep," the older people, to take care of them, right? They can't work Twitter, they can't work Facebook, all that. Well, help them out for the glory of the kingdom. And verse 17 ends this way. The third time, he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt. Don't you know that if Jesus had to be resurrected and come back from the dead to have a personal conversation with you, you might have messed up? Like if he makes that kind of appointment with you, then maybe something went wrong around your decision making. So Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things." If we believe that like Peter did, then you'd be able to get some sleep tonight. If you knew that the God who owned tomorrow was in your tomorrow, preparing it for you to get there, you might be able to rest some. And Peter said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus ended their conversation that we'll talk about right here by saying, "Then feed my sheep." Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for a word that does not return void. Thank you so much for this manuscript that's been preserved over time so that we could take a peek into that conversation and pull out what you would have for us this morning. I pray that in your way, in your will, that your word would go forth and speak into the lives of each and every person here this morning. In your name we pray. Amen. Go and have a seat when you can. If you would, on your way to your seat, I know it's a long way down for some of us. Could you share today's message title? Look to the person that you like the most. Decision-making time. Don't be over-religious and look up. Oh, okay. Hedging my bets. I'm covered right here. Don't do that. We look to him and say, "I can be your hero." Date night happening tonight. Like I said, youth group from 6th grade to 12th grade, 3 to 5 today. Y'all go enjoy that movie. But today's message, if you're a note taker, and all Christians and God-loving people are, kidding, but there's a notebook check in heaven, so you might want to keep that in mind. Today's title is Hero, and I have a Baptist background, so you know that I need 4 points and something that rhymes for you to go home with. So that's how today's going to roll a little bit. But isn't this an interesting conversation between Jesus and Peter? Now, not to plug youth again, but we're going to take 3 weeks to study the life of Peter, starting this week and going through April. But I think it's pretty amazing all that Peter did, but I also think it's very powerful all that Peter didn't do or failed to do. And we're in this series called Reset, where we're trying to make sure that our next time isn't like our last time. And I think that Peter's the perfect example because he had so many resets, so many fumbles. Like if he was the running back in the game, he would have been pulled before halftime. That's kind of how Peter's life went. But nonetheless, he scores winning touchdowns, and he won the Heisman over Judas. And all this stuff happened in Peter's life. So I thought he's the best example that we could use to talk about a reset in our lives. So I want to look at that verse 17 again. And that's where we're going to kind of hang out, and then we're going to do this like TV show flashback thing. So look at verse 17 again. The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt. So if you're taking notes, the first point is that your reset will come after your hurt, usually. whenever you don't want to keep going, whenever it's just too overwhelming, whenever the odds are stacked against you and you want to turn back, like the Israelites did, right? There's just so many reasons why you shouldn't keep going. But when you're hurt, usually your reset can follow that pain. And so I want to go on this little field trip of Peter, because when he's in this moment, he's in this conversation with Jesus. So imagine that, like, you're talking to Jesus and he asks you a question 3 times. Like, do you ever feel that you have to prove yourself over and over again? Like, even despite all your efforts to, like, keep trying to do good and keep trying to do well, like, yeah, Jesus, I love you. And then he asks again, and you're like, yeah, Jesus, are you good? Maybe the whole resurrection thing you're hearing, I don't understand how that works, but yeah, I love you, dude. Yeah. And nonetheless, like 3 times, you've got to keep proving yourself despite all odds. Maybe it's at home, maybe it's at work. You're trying to do your very best, and it just seems like it's coming up less and less of the goal. And so Peter's sitting in this moment, and he's hurt. And yet it says that he's hurt because Jesus asked him 3 times. But I think in that moment, like when you've been that kind of hurt, that it probably sends you on a flashback to all the mistakes that you made. And we tend to not remember all the good stuff we did in those kind of moments. But I'm just thinking back, I need to hit this reset button and all the mistakes that kept going. And so let's go on a little memory lane trip about Peter. So Peter meets Jesus because of his brother Andrew. Andrew sees Jesus walk by, and John the Baptist says, well, there's a Messiah. And Andrew says, oh, okay, bet. And he runs off and gets him and says, hey, Peter, I met this guy. He's a Messiah. You should come check him out. And so Peter comes along with him. And the first thing Jesus does when he sees Peter, this is strange, right? Imagine that you're walking up to someone brand new, and right when they see you, they call you by your given name. They tell you where you're from, and they tell you what you're going to be called. That's a gift, right? Now, I've walked into situations where people had many names to call me, but it wasn't quite the same situation. So here he walks up and he says, Simon, son of John. Oh, yeah, that's me. I just met you. And he says, you will be named Cephas, right? Ain't nothing wrong with the name John or Simon. Ain't nothing wrong with the name Simon. You're probably a Simon in this room right now, right? Ain't nothing wrong with the name Simon. Ain't nothing wrong with the name Cephas. So all of my soon-to-be parents, hey, put that one on your list. Cephas, that's a pretty good name. But the key to that is that Cephas was Aramaic for the Greek name Peter, and Peter derives from the name Petros, or the word Petros, meaning rock, right? And so he's like, hey, I just met you, but I want to call you something else. And so he gives him this name, Rock. And so then let's keep going through Peter's lifeline here of what would happen to him. So he gets named Rock, and then he decides to jump out of a boat. Again, Peter's decision-making isn't the smartest. Like, rocks don't float, dude. I don't know what you had in mind there, but isn't it so true that sometimes we'll get out of a situation where maybe we felt some security to walk towards something we're uncertain about, because that's why Peter got out the boat, right? So if you're going to make a life decision and you're going to leave something behind, you need to make sure that whatever you're going toward is a lot greater than whatever you're leaving behind you, right? And so he gets out of this boat and he's walking towards it. Now, please don't use this sermon series called Reset to get out of your marriage, or, you know, that's not what this is about. This is after you've exhausted all resources and you're having to start over. That's what this is. So don't say, well, Pastor told me to get out the boat, right? Pastor didn't say that, okay? Don't do that. All right, so he gets out the boat. He's walking towards Jesus, and he starts to sink, but nonetheless, Jesus looks at him, you have little faith, picks him back up, dries him out, right? And then he gets back in the boat, and they have a conversation. Is water wet, Peter? Right, no, just kidding. Right, so, yeah, that was on social media a lot. Is water wet? No, water's not, yeah. Anyway, so he keeps going, and so he now becomes the one who says, in a conversation with Jesus, Jesus asks, what are people saying about me? And Peter says, oh, I've got this one, guys. Well, I think they're saying this, but here's what I think. You're the Messiah. You're the man. You're the goat before the goat, right? You're just all these things. Sorry, everyone not in youth group. That's the greatest of all time. Not to say that he's the lamb. Excuse me, Pastor. He's the lamb, okay, that was slain. No, he's the greatest of all time is what that meant by goat. So that's what Peter's saying. Like, you're the guy. And so here's an interesting conversation piece that takes place between Jesus and Peter back in Matthew. So if you want to flip over to Matthew real quick, chapter 16, I want to take a little sneak peek into what would happen to Peter. So I'm going to flip over here too, just to make sure I stay in track with you guys. So verse 18, it'll be on the screen for you, 18 and 19. Again, this is a conversation between Jesus and Peter. Here's what Jesus said. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock, right? That's powerful. On this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades or hell will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom, yea, of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth, don't you know that it will be bound up in heaven? And whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. And to which Peter says, Mama say, Mama sa, mumakusa, right? Everyone's behind him saying, Peter, Peter, Petros, Cephas, right there, all this, they're like picking him up in the air, and they're like just pumping him up and saying, man, you're the man. Jesus just did this for you. He just gave you this great anointing. I can't believe, man, I wish I could be a Peter like that. Dwayne Johnson, like The Rock. Yeah, so that's what's going on in Peter's mind. So this is like the highlight of his discipleship, right? He just got a promotion. And 3 verses later, let's take a look at that. Here's what Peter would then go on to say after Jesus says, hey, I'm about to have to go to Jerusalem. They're going to arrest me. They're going to kill me, but I'm going to do that. But in 3 days, hey, I'm coming back. And Peter said, no. He took him aside and said, never, Lord. That's never going to happen. And I'm sure Jesus had this look on his face like, excuse me? This shall never happen to you. Side context, because you just named me the man. I'm the rock. So, Jesus, you already know to get to you, they have to go through me. And I am rock solid. I've been doing some abs lately. I've been on that P90X. I've been watching John Bishop's Facebook page. You already know what it is. Yeah, about to crush this back. So he is all hyped up. He is so excited. He's the man. And Jesus looks at him. He turned. I love it. Jesus turned, right? You know how your parents did. Back when you were little in the store running around the coat racks. That's how your parents did. They really should do something about the coat rack situation. Hopefully before Lennox is able to, they'll fix that. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. But I thought I was the rock, right? Satan, no, I'm supposed to be the one that's protecting from the gates of hell. And so I want to demonstrate this. Tommy, can I use you for a second? Everyone give Tommy a hand. Oh, yeah. Now, Tommy, I don't want my physique, stature to make you feel any insecure about yourself. But because of what you bench press, I'm going to let you be Jesus. I'll be Satan and Peter. Cool? All right. So Jesus looks to Peter and says, get behind me. But Peter originated the conversation by saying, no, I need to be out in front. Right? Y'all see this like moon eclipse? There's a shadow coming over Tanner right now. But he said, no, they got to go through me, because so many times in our lives before our reset, we found a way to get in the way of what Jesus had planned. Like I told our youth group at Universal, Jesus had a flow, and Peter didn't know it, but he was stepping in front of that flow. And he had all intents and purposes. Now, these are good intentions. No, I'm not going to let anything happen to you, although I don't think that it could. You'd have been able to pull off the resurrection in 2 days, Tommy, right? All right. So I'm not going to be able to get in front of the King of Kings and tell you how I want it to be done. But isn't that what we try to do? Like, dear Lord, I'm over here and I'm saying, I'll be back here and I'll say, dear Lord, get in my finances. Please help us get out of debt, Dave Ramsey style. And then as soon as I do, it's like, okay, I got it from here now, God. Credit card, check, right? And so now all of a sudden I can take back over. Or it's, God, please help me find a spouse. Please help me find that someone that I could just be dedicated to in this marriage. And as soon as I say, oh, well, look at her. Well, hey, okay, God, I got this. What is purity? I don't even know now. And so all of a sudden I'm trying to put my will in front of your will, and it doesn't work that way. So the other point you need to make sure you do in this reset, and to make sure that next time isn't like last time, is let his will go first. Let his will go in front of you. Now let me spin it this way. So many of us, so I'm Peter and I'm back here. Here's probably what Peter was thinking. Well, Jesus, I just got this big promotion. How are they even going to see me from back here? Right? So you're in the back and you're just thinking, but Jesus, I thought I was supposed to, right? You know, trying to be his hype man. You better not, right? And so all this. And here's what it's like at work. It's like, well, boss man, I'm trying to help you out. And how am I supposed to get this big promotion? How am I supposed to be seen at work and get the praise for everything that I've been doing from back here? They can't even see me. Can they even hear me? That's what Peter's thinking. I can't do that from back here. Or you've been serving for like 3 years at Kids Point, and you've been saying, I need to be up on that stage because I need to sing in the kid, hey, and that's my song, so right? And so that's where you want to be, but maybe we need you in Kids Point, maybe not singing right now, right, for the glory of God, but to volunteer in the parking lot. But so many times we get caught back here, and I'm thinking, God, am I even doing what you wanted me to do from way back here? But you can do it when you're in that same flow. You don't want to get in God's way. So I need to get behind him. Thank you, Tom. You've been an awesome example. I will see you at 4 a.m., sir. Yeah. So how many times in your life do you feel like maybe someone, like it's your boss, it's your spouse, right? You're trying to get out in front and have your will, your way, and they say, no, get behind me. Get behind. And it gets frustrating so many times. But I need to make sure that you realize that that's not a bad place to be. But so many times you want to tell it this way. There are 3 characters in a story. 3 characters in a story that I told you, so there's like 7 points. But 3 characters. I'm Baptist, so I got 3 points. One of them is the victim in the story. So Peter, if he were going to go retell this story to somebody, you would not believe what Jesus just said to me. Talking about get behind him after all I've been trying to do for him. Right, so he's the victim. A victim's perspective is this, what they did to me. That's a victim's perspective. And so when I go to tell my story of what happened, the events that took place, because Jesus told me to get behind him, I'm the victim, and I'm going to portray it that way. Can I let you know, you cannot be the victim in every story that you tell. You can't always be the victim. Now, I understand that sometimes you will be victimized. Sometimes you will be in a situation where something tragic or bad happens, and it is sad and it is tough to go through. But you cannot always be the victim. I want to make sure that you don't go to work tomorrow and look at your boss and say, get behind me, Satan, because the devils you're going to fight in the unemployment line are a lot larger than the one that you're going to face tomorrow morning. But that's a little easier to consider. But what about whenever it's my spouse, right? You can't always be the victim. You cannot always play the victim's role. Now, sometimes you can have something bad happen to you, but still don't stay the victim. And if you're a student in the room, you can't bring home a report card with a D in pre-cal talking about how that is the worst teacher ever, and you are one of 67 students who has a D. Something don't add up, right? You can't always be the victim. And that perspective is what they did to me. And so if you're not the victim, or if you're telling this story and you portray yourself as the victim, then there must be a villain. And so the villain's perspective is this right here. The villain says, what I need. That's their perspective. Here's what I need from you. And I'm going to do whatever I can. I'm going to enforce my will wherever I can to get what I need. And so it's easy for Peter to say, hey, I was trying to do good, and he told me to get behind him. He must be the villain right here. I was trying to help him out, and all of a sudden he's going to do that to me. So here's what I want to make sure that you know. Anytime you tell your story and there's a disagreement, you're not always the victim, but you probably are the villain. And before you start throwing, we don't have hymn books, before you start throwing offering envelopes at me, here's what I want to make sure you know. If you're in a disagreement, then on the other side of that argument, that villain, they have the same perspective about you that you do about them. So maybe anytime you're in a disagreement, an argument, a conversation, a point, maybe you should understand that I'm probably the victim and the villain. And then your perspective can change if you know that you're the victim and also the villain in that story. And then all of a sudden you get this newfound perspective. And I wanted this one to start with V also, because you have victim, you have villain, and then I wanted to be victor, but then I thought that like I would isolate all the victors in the room, and they'd be like, oh, that's me. But instead, let's go with hero, all right? So we're going to go with hero. And so there's a hero's perspective, and the hero's perspective is this: what we can be, right? So if Jesus is up here, I'm not as good as Jesus as you, Tommy, but if Jesus is up here and he says, Peter, get behind me, then it's not that he's being the villain. It's not that he's being the victim. He's not victimizing Peter. But I think that Jesus had a perspective where he knew what they could be. He knew what Peter could be. And so a hero's perspective says, come with me. I know what this situation can be. I know what my reset looks like, but I also know what it can turn into. And so if I'm not the victim and I'm not the villain and I want to be the hero, here's what you have to do. Own your part of your reset. You have to own up to whatever role you played. Now, again, don't be the victim and say, well, out of percentages, they 98% crazy, but I'll take the 2%. I'll take the 2. No. Take your whole part of whatever that situation is, whether it's a restart in a marriage, or whether it's a restart at work, whether it's a restart at school, and own your part. And so, to be a hero, here are the 4 things that you need to do. And I think this is what Peter did. I'm pretty sure that Peter, in some way, found his way through this. And so here are the 4 things that Peter did. He humbled himself. He humbled himself. In that situation, when he was hurt, when he was devastated by everything that had just happened, he was humbled by all the mistakes he'd made. And so if you're going to get through this reset and make sure that the next time isn't like the last time, humble yourselves of everything that happened. And then, like Pastor Tracy said last week, you have to evaluate. Evaluate what went right, evaluate what went wrong, so you can make a better, informed decision about what's coming next. And then I need to remember. So Peter's sitting there in this conversation with Jesus whenever he was hurt on the beach, and he's thinking, man, there's so much that's gone wrong in my life. There's so many mistakes I've made. He remembered, but he didn't live there. So don't stay in your past. You don't live there. But remember and recall so you can have a better reset. So he remembered what went wrong. And then last, he owned it. Own up to everything that you can. Anytime Marissa apologizes to me, I apologize to her. Because I know I played a role. Usually probably a larger role in whatever went wrong. So I automatically say, yeah, me too, girl. Like, I apologize too. And then sometimes I get the pop quiz. What are you apologizing for? Oh, shoot. Right? Just trying to, let me find something. Usually it has something to do with the laundry. I could find something. I go, well, I'm sorry. Got to be honest in the pulpit. And so Peter was humbled. He evaluated the situation. He remembered what happened last time and all the other last times, and he owned it. And so when you can do that, then you can become the hero that you need to be. Isn't that cool? How it did? Go ahead and share that to him. Oh yeah. That's what I spent my week doing. What did y'all do? 40-hour week right there, trying to highlight without the bullet points turning yellow. That's tricky. Got to finesse that. So let's catch back up to Peter. This ain't about me. I need to get behind you, Jesus. All right, so we left Peter behind Jesus when he was called Satan. Then he goes to the transfiguration, and if you remember the transfiguration, that's when Jesus took 3 of his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, and so it's like an exclusive invite only, and they're walking up this mountain, right, and they get to the top of the mountain, and Peter is so enamored with everything. He is so excited about everything. He's like, this is too cool. Backstage passes, right? And so he's looking, he's like, oh, shoot, there's Moses, there's Elijah. Oh, I know what we need to do, boys. We need to build these temples. One for you, Moses. Can you sign my book of Genesis before you go? And Elijah, we'll get one for you. And Jesus, how about one right here? Yours will be bigger. Don't tell them. All right, and then all of a sudden, God has to show up and say, dude, I need you to be quiet, right? Like you're trying to peek back around Jesus' shoulder. I need you to be quiet in this moment. And so there's another mess up that Peter was able to pull off. And so he goes from the transfiguration to then being told by Jesus, hey, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter's still caught up on this rock thing, thinking, there's no way, Jesus, that will ever happen. Nonetheless, they go to the garden, and Jesus is getting arrested, and this is Peter's moment. He said, I told you, Jesus, they got to go through me to get to you. whips out his lifesaver, shing, right? Okay, it wasn't a lifesaver, but it was a sword. It cuts off the guy's ear. And again, Jesus is like, Peter, dude, no, we don't play like that. Don't play ball in the house. Don't play with swords. You'll poke someone's eye out. John, take his sword, right? And so he puts the guy's ear back on. So many times Peter wanted to do the right thing, and often in your reset, you're doing the right thing or what you think is best, but it's just not in the same flow that God had planned. And so there we are again, drifting back behind Jesus, wondering, what did I do wrong? But when you got behind Jesus, that's what you did right. When you can get behind and you can stay and say, you know what, I've tried so many times to come around your shoulder, Jesus. How about I just stay on my knees and I say, behind you, your will be done. And then when my reset comes, it's going to be powerful than it ever has been. And so back to his story, Jesus gets arrested, Jesus gets crucified, hung on the cross with 3 nails, stays in the grave for 3 days, and then this is his third appearance to the disciples. Can we go back to verse 17 real quick? Because I know that we have a lot of scholars in the room. Y'all already knew this part, so I'm going to just speed through this part for those who may not have known. Verse 17 at the top said this, the third time he said to him, the third time, 3. So it was like one question for every deny Peter gave. So Jesus comes back from the resurrection and says, I have an appointment on the beach. You bring lunch or breakfast and I'll cook it and let's have this conversation. I'm going to ask you 3 questions because, Peter, you already showed me that maybe you didn't love me like you thought you did. But if you confess with your mouth and believe with your heart, I've got 3 questions, and it's the same one. Because I don't know how your Bible is, and maybe it's like mine. The way my Bible's set up is that this whole section is titled, Jesus Reinstates Peter. So I want to make sure you knew today that for every failed situation, for every reset that you've had to have in your life, Jesus has a reinstatement question for you, and it's based off of love. Do you love me? If we can agree on the love thing, I think we can keep going. And so he asked him 3 times, one for each of the times that Peter would deny Jesus or had denied Jesus. And so that's why Peter is sitting there hurt. But there's something you have to know about the number 3. It was 3 nails that he used to hang on the cross, or they used to hang him on the cross. It was 3 days in the grave. It was 3 appearances to the disciples. It was 3 questions for Peter. Oh, by the way, the number 3 in Hebrew means completion. So since the resurrection happened, our completion and reinstatement has already been fulfilled. So your question is, one time, do you love me more than these? Leave it right there, Jesus. That's all I need to know, because yes, I do. And I can make sure that I get up, and I can make sure that I can stay behind you whenever I need to. God, you be my provider. You show me the way. That's why this is so big of a conversation. But you already knew that part because you're well-educated and you worked a 40-hour job and knew that, and you didn't highlight the letters like I did. But you already knew all that. But there was something else that stuck out to me. And as the praise team comes back up, I thought that this was weird. And I kind of like the little Bible factual stuff without making it boring. Because trying to teach the youth group, I try to jazz it up some. But I thought it was interesting. And I want to pick this up after we look at what I call our verses. This is the us section of the sermon. So look at verse 19, and we'll get to 22, but it'll be on the screen for you. Jesus, after asking these 3 questions, looks at Peter and says, follow me. For me, it came into perspective all the facts of Peter's life. How he went from being said, get behind me, Satan, to follow me. What a better position to be in than if I'm supposed to follow you, Jesus. So his reset of get behind me, it wasn't really a reset at all. It was just a directive to say, no, we're still going. This isn't a full start over. This isn't a you messed up and it's never going to be good again. This is a just, hey, here's your directive. Just get behind me. Follow me. And like we like to do, whenever something good's about to happen, and we don't think we deserve this reset, this positiveness in our lives, we turn like Peter did. Peter turned. Probably not like Jesus did to him. Maybe he did and looked at him. And he said that he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. Now, the follow me that we just mentioned was Jesus saying, Peter, here's how you're going to be crucified just like me. You're going to go to the same path that I'm going to. I need you to do that. Get behind me. I need you to follow the same way that I did. But don't you know this is how we respond? You know how we do. When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Lord, crucified? Oh, what about John? John loves you. Hey, John, come on out here, John. Have this conversation with him. Let him, he's the one that he beat me to the tomb. He's a fast sprinter. So maybe he could follow you. Don't hand off your calling. You can't, no one can do it like you can. No one can work that situation like you can. That's why God has you in that situation. And so, verse 22, Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? Stay in your lane. So there Jesus is again, get behind me. But you, say you. And look at this word, that must. What a strong word. What a direct, what a command. Like, not just I think you should, not just a general it would be good if you did. This is a you must. Right? If Jesus was from the South, it would have been you had best, right? That would have been this moment, you must follow me. So you have to follow Jesus. Don't be ashamed or upset if for some way in life you're told to get behind him. If there's a reset that applies to you and you feel like it just disqualifies you, your reset does not disqualify you from anything. But it's the best place you can be is right behind Jesus, following him. So I read all that, and that was a big sermon message. That was it. And then I started looking at some of the verses, and I thought, something doesn't look right. If Jesus named Simon Peter, why didn't he ever call him Peter? It was weird to me. And so that's what I did after I highlighted the letters, I looked at that for, 39 hours. And I wondered, Jesus, if you came, like the first time you saw him, you called him Peter, why didn't you say, all right, Peter, get out the boat? Why didn't you say, Peter, follow me? Why didn't you, the only time he really called him in those verses was John would reference him, Matthew would reference Peter. And so it hit me all of a sudden that it must be this. It must be that Simon, son of John, was what he was called. Peter was his calling. So Jesus, hang on a second. I'm a little, let me try it again. If Simon is his given name, his given situation, and where he's from, but the rock is what he would be. So what you're saying, Jesus, is it possible that my calling is greater than what I'm called? Is it that I had these 3 questions, this pop quiz on the beach, and all of a sudden my calling is greater than what I'm called? You're called divorced. Your calling is marriage counselor. You're called addict. Your calling is rehab therapist. So at some point, there must be a connection between my reset and understanding that I can't be disqualified by it. It's not that I'm being reprimanded to get behind Jesus. It's that that's the directive so that we can be what we need you to be. That your calling is greater than whatever it is you've been called before, what you've been called in the past, and even what you want to call yourself today. So it must be, and check this out, and you can write this down. It'll be on the screen for you. Don't stay upset by your reset, but trust that your reset is your upset. Is it good? Is it okay? So that my calling doesn't fall under what I'm called, and I get so caught up in what I'm called every day at work, every day at the house, all the bills that are packing up, what my finances look like, what my clothes look like, what my image looks like, what my marriage looks like, what my job looks like. All these things are I have all these names for myself, and I want to call myself Satan, but all of a sudden Jesus comes in with a question, do you love me? If so, here's what I have. I have a calling for that situation. I know what you've experienced, but here's what I need you to help other people experience. The same love that Peter had for me. So if Peter could do it, so will I. If the disciples could stand behind Jesus, so will I. If they could follow his directive and build a church that is still growing strong for over 2,000 years, so will I.